Awesome. So good morning, everyone. My name is Jarek Langer, and I am part of the Sloan Research Papers team. It is my pleasure today to introduce to you Joseph Xu and Peter Fader, who are going to be presenting on evaluating the effectiveness of dynamic pricing strategies on MLB single game ticket revenue. So the presentation itself is going to be about 20 minutes, and then we're going to have 5 minutes for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please hold them till the end. Raise your hand, and I will try to get the mic to you so everyone can hear the question. With that, please join me in welcoming Joseph Xu and Peter Fader.
Thank you. So we want to talk about not just the aha of doing different kinds of dynamic pricing strategies, but the formal economics of it. How much more money would a club make by using certain kinds of dynamic pricing strategies compared to not doing so? And so, look, we know that dynamic pricing is difficult. It's not just the next shiny object. Just go ahead and do it and trust us. It's at the point now, with so much interest in it and with so much collective experience about it, that we really need to know what we're getting for it. And so we have a unique opportunity here, thanks to an MLB club. It's just a perfect situation to really assess the incremental value that a dynamic pricing strategy brings, and I'm going to hand things over to Joseph to talk about it.
Thank you, Pete. Wrong way. Okay, great. Okay, so the research question that we're going to be asking today is the same set of questions that a lot of sports teams have been asking on a daily basis. How do we price our tickets better? And while there are certainly many ways to address this problem, what we're going to talk about today is a bottom-up approach to this issue. We're going to ask ourselves, what is the underlying demand process that generates demand for sporting event tickets? And we're going to answer this question by building a model of customer demand for ticket buying. And once we understand what ingredients go into the decision process that governs how customers purchase tickets, we can work our way backwards to answer how do we price our tickets better and what makes dynamic pricing policies effective. And we're very fortunate to have this very rich data set provided by our partner team in the Major League Baseball. And while at first glance, it's just ticket sales data and you have all these other complementary information with it, there's nothing that special about this data. But what really sets this data set and our methodology apart is the fact that we have almost a natural experiment setting going for us. So to explain this in detail, our partner team started out this season with variable pricing policy. So what this means is that ticket prices are allowed to vary across different games and across different seat sections, but they have to remain constant over time. And only in the second half of the season did they start implementing dynamic pricing policies. What this allows us to do is to get a very accurate estimate on the effect of price on customer demand, which would otherwise be very difficult to do if dynamic pricing had been implemented the entire season. We don't know whether price is affecting demand or demand is affecting price that way. But with our data set right here, we have no such concern and we can go ahead and do our business. So the model that we're going to cover today is going to be the customer ticket purchase process. And we're going to break that down into 3 phases. Customers are first going to come in and try to decide which games they want to attend. Once they decide which games they want to attend, they will decide on the quantity of tickets to purchase. And finally, once they decide on both of these issues, they're going to say, well, which section of the stadium do I want to sit in? So let's just talk about these a little bit more in detail. In the first step, our model is going to estimate the number of orders that's going to come in daily for any particular home game. And we're going to use a standard set of explanatory variables to explain this. One little tweak we did to the model is to use a negative binomial regression model, which guarantees that we get positive count data. So this model actually ensures that we don't get any funky estimates like, hey, on this day, you're expected to sell negative amount of tickets. Once that's done, we're going to estimate the number of tickets sold associated with each order. And we're going to say this process works the same way as the first stage using the same set of variables, and we're also going to guarantee that we're not going to have negative number of tickets sold for any kind of game. The reason why we split these stage up into two stages instead of just lumping it all together and trying to estimate the number of tickets sold per day is the fact that we recognize that the number of tickets that you need to buy is probably going to affect which section of the stadium that you would like to go to. So in the final stage, we're going to estimate customer choice by using standard multinomial logit framework, but we're going to look at the number of tickets this customer is going to need, and we're also going to look at the granular data of section-level pricing and section-level stadium utilization. So with this model, we could proceed as we have discussed before. We're going to use first half of the season to estimate the parameters of this model. And then using what happened in the second half of the season, we can generate revenue estimate associated with a particular pricing policy. And this allows us to ask questions like, well, did our partner team do better because they implemented dynamic pricing? And if they did better, by how much? And what we can also do then is to look at other candidate pricing policies, try to optimize around them, and ask the question, how much better could they have done? So before we go into the talking about different pricing policies, let's just take a look at how well our model predicts the revenue. So here's the out-of-sample test for the 49 home games in the second half of the season. The x-axis is the actual revenue, the y-axis is the model prediction, and the 45-degree line is going to be a perfect forecast. And you see that a lot of games actually land around pretty close to the 45-degree line. So this actually means that even though there is variation on a game-by-game level, it tends to even out over the course of a season. And where we do get outliers, we can easily understand why that is the case. This is the last home game, which actually happened to be the last game of the baseball season as well. So our model gives a very good revenue profile associated with a specific pricing policy. And aside from this ability to just compare different pricing policy, the fact that our model is able to estimate ticket sales is already quite interesting. And when we look a little bit deeper into what the model tells us, what the parameter estimates are, we can have a good understanding of what really drives customer demand. So it's quite obvious that customers prefer lower prices, but at the same time, we could see that customers prefer to have more people in the stadium and really appreciate better team performance. So just to put these numbers into perspective, the effect of stadium utilization means that for every about 500 extra seats sold, this has the same effect on demand as lowering your average stadium ticket price by $3.50. And similarly, every extra win for a home game is about the same effect as lowering your average ticket price by about $1. And you can compare these with effects on various promotions, for example. And I just want to add that at this point, we're really not arguing any causality here. We're not saying having more people in the stadium will increase your revenue necessarily, but these are interesting metrics that's very simple for sport team to track to see if there's any opportunity for price intervention in that regard. So back to the question now, did our partner team do well after the implementation of dynamic pricing policy, and by how much? And what we're going to do is to compare policy 1 and policy 2. Policy 1 is going to be our baseline case, which we evaluate all our other policies against, and this is going to be the scenario where if the team had kept the price constant throughout the entire season, no price movement whatsoever. Policy 2 is what actually happened. We're going to take the actual prices charged by our partner franchise and come up with revenue estimate, and the difference is going to be tell us how effective the dynamic pricing policy was. We're also going to look at 3 alternative pricing policies. Policy 3, which we're going to call the optimal variable pricing policy, is going to be the best case scenario if you had kept the price fixed. So we're going to allow the team to change prices just once at the beginning of second half of the season when they started adopting dynamic prices. We're going to tell you exactly how well your team did in the second half, and you're allowed to switch all your sections based on that just once at that time. Policy 4, which we're going to call the optimal myopic dynamic pricing, is going to be the case where you have no knowledge of the future, but you are willing to be very flexible. So you're going to change prices every day to try to maximize the revenue for that particular day only, hence the name myopic. So you could very well imagine maybe a crazy price jump, like you move up $2 one day, and then the next day you lower it $4, up $6 the next. This is perfectly valid. We apply a pretty loose set of assumptions here to allow it to see what was the best case we could have achieved if we just let dynamic pricing go all out. The fifth policy, the optimal myopic monotone dynamic pricing policy, is a little bit closer to reality. We're going to say, yes, you could dynamically price and change prices every day to try to maximize revenue for that particular day, but your price cannot go down. And a lot of teams would actually consider strategies like this because they don't want to alienate customers that ended up buying earlier. So in addition to what happened in reality, we're going to look at 3 other cases which represent perfect knowledge but inflexible, no knowledge but perfectly flexible, and one policy that is much more grounded in reality. So any guesses as to which policy did the best? Well, it's kind of like watching a movie where you know what happens in the end, right? But there's a bit of a plot twist here. We were actually quite surprised to see that our partner team did not improve their revenue after adoption of the dynamic pricing policy. And we investigated why. We compared the difference between the actual dynamic pricing policy and the suggested optimal pricing policy, and found 2 reasons where this team could have improved. So one area is in terms of the pricing of the stadium ticket. We found that there were about 3 to 4 sections in the stadium that were quite mispriced based on our recommendation. So the optimal variable pricing policy would have actually suggested increasing the ticket price for those sections by more than $10. So there was certainly a lot of money left on the table simply because this team didn't price these sections well at first. Now, to their credit, they got most of the sections right, and they did a pretty good job in general, we feel. But the magnitude is still huge. There was a lot of room to be improved upon. And secondly, the reason why the dynamic pricing policy wasn't as effective is the fact that they had used a non-decreasing pricing policy. So they were only allowed to increase prices and not decrease them. But this team had actually suffered quite subpar performance on the field in the second half of the season. So if you're not delivering on the field, people don't want to come to your stadium, and if you can't lower your prices, you can't really improve your revenue that way. And the value of flexibility we can see by really comparing the difference of policy 4 and policy 5, because you see that once we eliminate the possibility of moving prices down, the effectiveness of dynamic pricing policy is reduced by more than 75%. So if you're going to use dynamic pricing policy, you would want to give it as much flexibility as possible. So just to illustrate our point a little bit, we're going to look at the actual price paths on what happened for a particular home game in August. So in this graph, as you go across, this is a lead up to the game day, and we have prices for 5 different sections in the stadium. And you see that there's dynamic pricing kicking in, and sections are increasing prices as you move toward game day. What our variable pricing policy would have suggested was price increase on 3 of these sections. And you see that this price increase suggested for the upper deck section and outfield section is quite substantial. This is more than $10 increase that they're suggesting. And while dynamic pricing actually employed by our partner team is trying to make up for that difference in the outfield section, but it comes a little bit too little, too late. On the other hand, the optimal dynamic pricing policy actually has a pretty similar price paths compared to the optimal variable pricing policy. So it's actually important to recognize here is just because you have let dynamic pricing go all out and do whatever it wants to, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to end up with a crazy price profile. You would actually, chances are you're going to end up with something relatively smooth until you reach game day, because that's really where the demand starts to pick up. And you see here is that a lot of the price increase in the first and third baseline section does happen pretty close to the game day, and the discount in the outfield section, even though it's pretty steep, that's also close to the game day. So this also illustrates another important point, that there's really no reason for you to specify any sort of pricing policy saying that all the seats in the stadium has to go up together or go down together. You could really increase prices for a specific part of the stadium and then decrease price in another section of the stadium at the same time. And this can really maximize efficiency for dynamic pricing policy. And we're not going to cover the monotone policy just in the interest of time. It actually looks quite similar to the variable pricing case, except that prices are a little higher on some sections because they don't have prior knowledge that this team was going to do pretty badly in the second half of the season. So we just want to wrap up by making the remark that a lot of revenue improvement can be had simply by correcting mispricing in your stadium section. If you can understand how much customer value each seat, you can fix that and recognize a lot of revenue advantage from there. In terms of dynamic pricing, it's important to give it as much flexibility as possible. That's really the whole point of dynamic pricing, is that you get to react to whatever demand shocks that you observe. And finally, we want to say that dynamic pricing is a very nuanced subject. There's a lot of strategic decisions that go into making this. For example, the choice of not decreasing price. While people might think that that's leaving money on the table, but a lot of the time, this could be a very important way to build up customer relationships. And what our model provides is an opportunity for management to review these internal policies and try to figure out what makes sense. What is the best amount of flexibility that you can give dynamic pricing? And with that, we could hope that they can make a more informed decision about these strategic issues and improve daily operations of the sport team. And with that, thank you, and we'd like to open up the floor for questions.
And we'll take any questions. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand, and I'll try to get the mic to you.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering how you communicate the lowering prices to customers, or did you just find that they were sensitive and already paying attention? Because that would be one concern I would have, would be that you're just lowering prices, but no one knows, and they're just buying them anyway at the lower rate.
Well, in this case, as far as the latter three policies, they were just simulated. So there was nothing about the communication around them or the other nuances of the implementation. But it's just to say, how many dollars could be made or are being lost by using or not using some of those more flexible policies.
Did you guys have to use any uncensoring techniques in this analysis?
Oh, yeah. Actually, in terms of the customer demand, the reason why we limit ourselves to modeling the total number of orders that comes in is because we don't get to observe customers that were considering purchase at first place but don't get to buy. So we don't explicitly model customer choice that way, but one advantage that this gives us is that we don't exactly have to worry about customers' effect of such as secondary market or customer expectations, because all of that is sort of baked into the number of orders that's going to come in at the end.
Hi, I was wondering if you took the secondary market into consideration and how that influenced pricing and your recommendations.
Okay, yeah, so like we've mentioned before, we try to explicitly model only the number of orders that comes in. So that actually takes into the effect of lowering price or increasing price is in the traffic to the primary market in the first place.
I think it's a great question. It'd be great to understand the whole ecosystem about what impacts what. But from a very practical standpoint, if you're the club and you don't really have any control over the secondary market or other exogenous factors, this is just the best you can do with the hand you've been dealt.
Any other questions?
Hi, I was wondering what level of real application this methodology has had, and what are the barriers that you're seeing from the teams or from your clients or whoever's using it to adopting this technology in their pricing or this thinking in their pricing?
I think the biggest barrier has just been clubs having kind of the courage to go out there and vary prices, across games, overtime, across sections. And it's nice that we've really gotten a lot past that in recent years. The clubs are not only willing to try it, but willing to run experiments and learn and really get a clear impact on it. This case here, I think, is just a one-shot analysis. We're very fortunate that we had this unique data set that allowed it. But it'd be interesting to see clubs go out there and not just go all out dynamic pricing, as many are, but to hold back at times to allow for similar kinds of experimentation.
How did you determine how much to raise prices by or lower prices by, and when to do it?
So a lot of the policies that we looked at, in addition, was simulated. So this is really what the model kind of told us, and we just told it to go look for a range of numbers and give us what performs the best. And a lot of times, the best policies tend to have they're not going to fluctuate very wildly, because there's really that optimal point where customer revenue for a single customer and traffic exactly balances out, and you don't want to deviate too much from there. So the quick answer to your question would be you're probably going to only change by at most $2 to $3 every day, because that's really the amount that makes the most sense.
We have a question over here.
Yes, you talked about flexibility with pricing and be able to lower it, but also clubs not wanting to drop below season ticket holder prices. Could you just explain that a little bit more and how to deal with that?
Right. So actually, in most cases, dropping below season ticket holder prices isn't that much of an issue, because season ticket holder prices are pretty low to begin with. So whatever pricing policy you have, you can probably expect to stay above that. The concern that most clubs have actually is the fact that if you charge, say, $20 for a ticket and lower that to $15 later, the people who bought at $20 is going to feel a little bad when they check out later and found that price has gone down. So that's...
So in other words, there's two different floors here. There's the season ticket holder floor that's real low, and then there's that monotonic policy. So the first one isn't a very strong binding constraint. We probably wouldn't want to get below that anyway, right. But it's that monotonic constraint's the big one.
And time for one final question, if anyone has one.
Hi, from your experience and your learnings with an MLB season, splitting it in half, how do you feel about how this would apply to a home schedule that was, say, a lower number of games, like 9 games, like a football schedule versus a baseball or hockey?
Obviously, it'd be harder to do exactly this kind of analysis. Baseball gives us that luxury to be able to really calibrate a model very well for a given club in a given season. But you could do the same kind of thing across seasons or across clubs, where you can calibrate, get even more variability. And you know what? It might even actually be better in a case like that, because as Joseph said, the team did badly in the second half of the season. Their performance was way outside the bounds of what we observed in the first half. So if you go across a broader cross-section of seasons and clubs, you'll capture pretty much every possible contingency, and so you won't be as surprised when you kind of roll it out afterwards.
Okay. Please join me in thanking Joseph and Peter for their presentation once again.